Picture this. It's 1590. You're on a ship slowly dropping anchor off the foggy, rugged coast of North America. The wooden hull is groaning in the ocean swell, and you're peering through the mist, fully expecting to see a bustling, thriving colony ready to welcome you. But instead, as you row ashore and step onto the land, you're hit with this absolute, deafening silence. Literally nothing. And just like that, America's oldest, and honestly, coldest, unsolved mystery was born. Let's dive into this explainer. Now, I want you to really think about the staggering human scale of what this search party discovered, or I guess I should say what they didn't discover. We're talking about the sudden, complete disappearance of 115 people. This wasn't just a handful of soldiers or some lost explorers who wandered off. This was an entire community. 115 men, women, and children, just completely and inexplicably erased from the North American landscape. You know, usually when a settlement fails, history leaves behind a pretty morbid breadcrumb trail. But here, there was an incredibly eerie lack of forensic evidence. No bodies, no signs of some desperate battle or a siege. There wasn't even a single grave to suggest they were wiped out by disease or starvation. So we know this wasn't some chaotic massacre. It was just this sudden, exceptionally clean erasure of an entire settlement.
Part 1. England's New World Dream.
Okay, to really understand the tragedy here, we have to rewind 3 years to 1587. Sir Walter Raleigh, with the backing of Queen Elizabeth, had this massive vision for a permanent settlement led by a man named John White. What made this specific expedition so different from previous ones, which were basically just military outposts, was the emotional stakes. Entire families were crossing the ocean to lay down roots. Among them was John White's own daughter. And actually, shortly after landing, his granddaughter was born, Virginia Dare, the very first English child born in America. These were real families risking everything to build a brand new life in a totally unfamiliar world. But as you can probably guess, that dream fractured pretty quickly. Landing on Roanoke Island in 1587, they immediately ran into severe food shortages, not to mention hostile relations with some of the local native tribes. Things got so desperate that the colonists practically begged John White to sail all the way back to England to get vital supplies. He promised he'd be back quickly. But then 1588 hits, and war breaks out with Spain. The massive Spanish Armada was threatening England's shores, and literally every available ship was commandeered for defense. Because of that, John White was trapped across the ocean for 3 agonizing years. It wasn't until 1590 that he finally managed to organize a return voyage. Part 2. The only clue left. So, returning in 1590, John White is obviously expecting this huge, joyful reunion. Instead, he basically steps into a real-time forensic investigation of a completely abandoned ghost town. As he and his crew are frantically scouring the empty grounds, they stumble upon a single, incredibly dramatic piece of evidence. Carved deliberately into a wooden post was just one cryptic word, CROATOAN. That was it. The only message left behind. It was a direct reference to a nearby island that was inhabited by friendly Native Americans. Now, here is where it gets really interesting, because the most crucial piece of evidence was actually what was missing. You see, before he left, White had established a very specific protocol with the colonists. If they were in peril or forced to evacuate under some kind of immediate threat, they were supposed to carve a cross, a distress cross, into a tree or post. White desperately searched that post and the entire surrounding area, but no cross, nothing. When we systematically break down this physical evidence, it allows us to piece together their final days. The word CROATOAN clearly directed White to that friendly island. The total lack of a distress cross strongly implies that whatever caused them to leave, it wasn't a sudden violent attack. But the biggest clue? The homes hadn't just been left there to rot. They had been carefully dismantled. Taking down heavy timber homes takes a massive amount of time and effort. It doesn't happen in a panic. This tells us their departure was highly organized, planned, and completely methodical. All the evidence points straight to a deliberate relocation, not a violent end. It really seems like White had a solid lead, doesn't it? Just sail over to CROATOAN Island. But here is the heartbreaking, truly tragic twist of fate. Right as White prepared to follow this solitary clue to find his family, nature intervened. Unbelievably severe, punishing storms started battering the coast. The weather got so incredibly dangerous that White's ship was literally forced to abandon the search entirely and flee back out to the open ocean. Forced to leave before he could ever even reach the island, John White never saw his family again. Part 3. Theories of the Lost. Because White was forced away, the trail went ice cold right then and there in 1590. And for centuries, historians and archaeologists have agonized over this mystery, eventually landing on 5 leading theories about what actually happened after those colonists walked out of Roanoke. First, the hopeful one. They successfully reached CROATOAN and assimilated into friendly native tribes. Second, they wandered into the harsh wilderness and tragically starved. Third, they were intercepted and killed by hostile tribes. Fourth, Spanish forces found them and wiped them out. And finally, they migrated inland as one cohesive group. Now, while modern archaeologists have actually found some tantalizing clues hinting at that inland migration, the reality is no definitive proof has ever validated one theory over the others. And so the mystery just outlives the centuries. This single enigma has completely captivated the world's imagination for well over 400 years now. It's spawned countless books, blockbuster films, and endless exhaustive investigations. Yet, despite all our modern technology, the absolute truth remains completely swallowed by the fog of the North American wilderness.
Which leaves us staring right back into that exact same atmospheric fog from 1590, looking at an empty coastline, left with nothing but the silence. It forces us to ask one final haunting question, doesn't it? How does a settlement of 115 people simply vanish without a trace? It is, without a doubt, America's oldest unsolved mystery, and the answer is still out there, just waiting in the dark.